there's a book out there that's causing quite a stir, and its title is The Commissariat of the Heralds of the Gospel, a narrative of the facts, 2017 to 2025. Punished without dialogue, without proof, and without defense. If you haven't read the book, then this video is for you. There are many out there who are saying that the book is exaggerated and that the heralds are disobeying the church and whatnot. But excuse me, all those who say this, they haven't actually read the book. So I want to spare you from making a fool of yourself by judging something without knowing the facts. So as you may have heard, the heralds are under an intervention by the Vatican. It's been 8 years now, and the first part of the book is a cold narrative of the facts. 300 pages, no opinions, just facts, nothing else. Or better said, a purely objective account with many documents that prove an incredible amount of abuse of power, illegalities and injustices. And the supporting documents can be found in the appendix of the book. In fact, these are only a part of everything that the heralds have gathered along the years. Because if they were to include everything, they would have to publish more volumes. The story begins long before this so-called case, long before the apostolic visit began. There was this cardinal who took a dislike towards the heralds and vowed to take revenge. For what reason? No one really knows. The fact is, and it's documented fact, by the way, and there's even photographs. The fact is that this cardinal, Jerome Brasdevis, found a group of haters, of enemies of the heralds that gave him a pretext to carry out his plans. A little while later, with the help of certain unscrupulous media outlets, the matter took on the proportions he desired. Nationally and internationally, the heralds were slandered, mercilessly slandered, and from these slanders also came accusations and artificially fabricated lawsuits. Oh, and spoiler alert, the heralds have already won them all. Then came the first phase of the intervention, an apostolic visit, which is a kind of Vatican investigation. And this was decreed by that same cardinal, who was now the head of the dicastery of Institutes of Consecrated Life and the Societies of Apostolic Life, something like the ministry of the Vatican that takes care of the religious. Now, the charges or complaints against the heralds that brought about this investigation were never revealed. Even the matter of the alleged crimes of which they were to be investigated were not made known. It's like someone who had been arrested, tried and convicted without even knowing why. I don't really know the difference between this and the Nazi or Soviet courts. But if that sounded strange to you, it gets even worse. Absurd even when we see that not even the investigators appointed by the Vatican were given access to the mysterious information, that concerning information. It's as if someone were to say, there's something wrong with someone somewhere, investigate, search, but above all, find something. And if you don't find anything, you're at fault. Well, that's exactly what happened. And despite a great deal of effort, especially on the part of the chief visitor, Don Jaime Spengler, they found nothing. Now, the enemies of the heralds were given special attention by the investigators in the regions that they visited, but the heralds, in spite of that, cooperated without objecting. All of the members, one by one, were interviewed, minutes were noted down, but all of this in the midst of a consterning perplexity. Why this intervention? No answers. And every time the heralds approached the dicastery to establish a dialogue, they were rejected with or without a response. Finally, the visitors presented their conclusions. According to them, the results were favorable to the heralds. So what was the reward that the heralds received? A commissariat. What a pleasant surprise, isn't it? Between us, let us not be naive.
Eu, como comissário, Dom José Aparecido como auxiliar, nomeado pela congregação.
The commissariat was already in the plan, and the apostolic visit was just a formality, just to give a veneer of legality to a plan that had already been decided. And so the commissariat begins, and everything was repeated once again.
Agora o relatório confirmou a existência de situações problemáticas. Claro que é um termo genérico, evidentemente.
There were very serious allegations of serious abuse and offences. So a pontifical commissioner was appointed to intervene.
O poder de governo, então, passa para o comissário.
A commissioner, you see, takes over the executive power of the institution. That is, he becomes the superior general. So everything was repeated. Not even the commissioner knew why he was commissioning the heralds.
Então, é mais complicado. Eu pensei que eles iam me dar um caminho, ó. O primeiro passo é esse, o segundo é esse, o terceiro é esse, o quarto é esse, etc. Nada. Então, nós estamos fazendo o que nós achamos que devemos fazer.
The same old story again. The heralds of the gospel were still in the dark as to why they were being commissioned.
De uma maneira muito genérica, se entra em problemas concretos.
Fica sempre ressalvado o direito de pedir ao Santo Padre que reveja sua posição.
And the same old story. The dicastery continued to close the door to dialogue. And that same door that was slammed towards the heralds was opened to welcome the entire gang of the institution's detractors. The haters, the enemies, who poured out the venom of their slander, welcomed with the finest liquors. Double standards? You be the judge. In fact, from a legal standpoint, the intervention got off to a very bad start. First, with the empty, irregular, invalid decree intended for other entities, or even, believe it or not, for non-existent entities.
Sobre o que se trata de erros materiais do decreto, nós podemos pedir para que se corrijam.
Then they try to correct it with another fraudulent decree. And finally, they induced Pope Francis to ratify this illegal document. This was only the first series of illegalities. Others followed, and the heralds resisted with the law in their hand.
Debemos dizer que no reconocemos os senhores como comissário.
Because if arbitrariness were allowed, anything would be possible, even the dissolving of the institution. The abuses of power against the heralds of the gospel were multiplied. I won't list them all here. Well, you'll understand why. I'll just mention a few. For instance, the heralds were banned from hosting the young participants of their educational project in their communities, and no proof of serious motive was presented for this measure, just like in a dictatorship. Except, of course, for the usual anonymous reports that were considered reliable in advance, right? As for the families who protested because they were unable to fulfill the plans they had made for their children, after using their right to protest, they were not heard. These same families joined together to ask Cardinal Abonnez-vous to reconsider his position. Their petition had more than 2,600 signatures. That is each and every family of these young children. Ideological cruelty is not Christian, nor does it have limits, you see. Speaking of not being Christian, we'll just mention in passing the moral integrity of the assistants who were chosen for the commission. In the midst of the work of the commission, one of the assistants, Carmelite friar Evaldo Xavier, was involved in an international scandal because of certain intimate photographs of him which were quite revealing, to put it mildly. Soon after this scandal broke out, 2 more members of the team ended up resigning. And why might that be? And what of Bishop Denilson, who didn't play a very dignified role either, when he assaulted a sister of the Heralds of the Gospel. And I close here this sad and well summarized parenthesis of moral integrity.
Após aquela visita apostólica, a igreja então quer justamente colaborar com os Heralds.
And what was the result of this commissariat that was supposedly intended to heal and help?
E tomamos isso como uma missão de serviço, né? De ajuda, de apoio.
Countless injuries, not only for the institutions and their members, but also for the general public.
Da boca do Santo Padre a gente tem bem claro que isso é uma missão que não deve ser destrutiva.
First of all, moral damage to the reputation of the institution by the shadow of doubt that was cast over it due to the abusive prolongation of this situation. Then, the economic damage due to the costs of the intervention, all at the expense of the heralds. Millions and millions. Institutional losses due to the unstable situation, apostolic works frustrated, ministry jeopardized. Because, I forgot to mention, 6 years ago, nearly 30 deacons of the heralds were forbidden from being ordained as priests.
A aprovação da promoção aos ministérios, entende? E a ordem, e as ordens sacras também fica reservado ao comissário.
Then there are also 6 batches of seminarians who have completed their studies and are waiting their turn. All temporary and perpetual vows to be taken were suspended and new admissions barred. The dicastery led by Cardinal Braz-de-Vis was responsible for all of this. This man is to be held responsible not only for his own deeds, but also for allowing these same deeds to be used to provoke a worldwide wave of slander. The victims are not, and that's crystal clear, the victims are not the ones who invented stories of alleged abuse to harm the institution. The victims, why? The victims are the very heralds of the gospel. Not just the institution, but each of its members individually who silently endured 8 years of this arbitrary intervention that managed to combine so many forms of crime, persecution, and abuse of power and conscience. But there is a limit to everything. And this book brings the truth to light. Now, don't let anyone fool you by saying that the heralds are wrong to defend themselves. It has never been disobedience to defend oneself against unjust accusations, because, in fact, by defending themselves, they are also defending Holy Mother Church, the one who was most offended and injured in this sad story.